Okay, hey guys, welcome to the Good Podcast. I am Rob Watson, and in today's episode, I'm speaking with contemporary abstract expressionist artist Michelle Sakhai, who is based over in New York City. Her paintings reference the teachings of transformational art, with a real focus on light and energy, and using spontaneous strokes as well to serve as a vehicle for healing and peace. And so I'm really looking forward to this chat. Everyone who listens to this podcast knows that I'm a designer myself, so I'm very interested in the arts, but also the healing power of creativity. So thank you, Michelle, for speaking with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So for anyone who's new to your work, do you want to just tell us a little bit about it and your approach, and be interesting to hear?
Sure. So I work really intuitively. I work with oils on metal leafing. So I metal leaf my entire canvas before I paint on it, and sometimes there's several layers of metal leafing and several layers of oil paint, but everything is intuitive, and I really don't. I may have an idea before I start creating, but I don't necessarily know exactly what it is I'm going to paint until I approach the canvas and I just kind of dive in. I don't do sketching. I don't, and I have a background as a plein air painter. So I spent 20 years landscape painting, which was the best teacher, I believe, for, Mother Nature really just being outside and having to translate exactly what you're seeing and feeling in the moment, and taking a three-dimensional subject matter and putting it onto a two-dimensional canvas was great learning. And then there came a point where I wanted to go deeper as an artist, and I say, the muse became internal. So I stopped searching for things to paint and just allowed whatever I was feeling within come out to the surface. So it became a deeper meaning for myself, and also really healing. And I can go into that later, but I think, it's interesting because the whole time I was a painter, and the entire time I was always working with oils, and the metal leafing did develop. But it's interesting how when I made the switch, it was like a new medium, and it was like I was a painter for the first time, if that makes sense. So, and with oils, for all you artists listening, it's a lifetime of learning to work with them. It's such a deep medium, and it's not to say the other mediums aren't, as, I don't know, beautiful, and, acrylics and watercolors, but there's something with oils that is a lifetime of learning. And so, yeah, in a nutshell, that's how I work.
That sounds good. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was overcoming kind of creative blocks, but it sounds if you just have kind of got yourself out of the way a little bit and have become much more intuitive in your approach, then maybe you don't have creative blocks as much because of your approach.
Yeah, so I think with the creative blocks, I hear this a lot. Luckily, I haven't experienced that, but I think because I try to work authentically. I'm basically just trying to translate. I'm kind of the translator with what I'm feeling intuitively and what I put onto the canvas. So I'm basically just channeling, right, the higher self or my soul within myself onto the canvas. So I kind of I tried to, put my thinking brain aside, which is, right, our ego, and work straight from a soul level, if that makes sense. So I think the creative blocks, I think, is mental. And I think if for me, taking a deep breath before I work and just aligning myself with the higher part, the higher self within me, then I'm no longer in that thinking mode, and I'm more in the creative mode, if that makes sense. It's kind of hard to articulate. I think all you artists may understand what I mean in terms of like trying to articulate, how you create, because it's, for me, it's, well, first it's nature for me. It's like breathing, right? It just comes out. So I don't really think about it. But I think the more over the years, and I've become more spiritual and more connected to the deeper part of myself, it's been easier and more, the art has just been more fluid. So I'm never like sitting there being like, oh, what should I paint, and should it be like this or should it be like that? Because I think the creative part of myself is way smarter than that. That if I trust that part of myself, then I don't have to think about it, if that makes sense. Sorry if I'm speaking very abstractly, but I because I'm speaking from someone that used to be a plein air artist, where I would spend hours outside, and even having my academic background, I have my master's from the Academy of Art San Francisco, where we spent hours and hours in the studio and on the drawing horse, and I would come home and have to ice my arm from portrait painting drawing, and hours and hours of that. And it's a very different I think switch in your brain of like creating, because it's one thing to look at what's in front of you and translate that what you're seeing, and it's another switch in your brain, I think, that that you're aligning with when you're working from within. So I think the goal once I switched the goal from being, how do I take what's in front of me and make it as beautiful and realistic as I can, to now, how can I be the most authentic self, and how can I translate what it is I'm feeling authentically? And when you have, that different approach, then the whole process is different and the whole outcome is different. And it took me time to explore this and to make this switch, because all you listening that is in the academic world, and you spend years and years and years being told that there is a right way, and that's the right way, and you have to, the composition and all these things, like you have all these rules, and you spend years since I was a child, when I first started painting and going to all different art schools, because I went to a ton of different art schools in my lifetime. But I think that's why I went, going back to when I said becoming a painter, I felt like I was becoming a painter for the first time again, because it was all new to me.
When you're talking there, what comes to mind is that you almost had to put in, say, people talk about 10,000 hours to become a master at something. It's as if you had to put them hours in to have your craft. So now what you're doing, you're kind of doing it automatically. And once you've now in that place of trust and flow, then you've built up the skill set to allow that to come through. And I wonder whether that would happen for people. How well would that happen for people if they didn't have that experience behind them? It's a bit like listening to, say, Paul McCartney, when he would talk about, writing songs. He was a master at that, but then sometimes he would just wake up in the morning and he had a dream about, I think it was Hey Jude or some other songs, and he came to said that information came to him from his mother was speaking to him beyond the grave. And but yeah, like it just sounds to me like it's about, you have to develop that craft, but then you can get into that place of trust and allowance to sort of come through.
Yeah, and it's funny you refer to music, because I always refer to music. Like, even, when I talk about artists like Beyonce, who's so famous, and, she started out in church, right, at choir singing, and so did many other famous singers, where they spent hours and hours from childhood doing scales and singing at church. So, and learning gospel, right? So I think it's similar to any, like you're saying, to any practice and with painting too, I think having the basics and learning, I was taught very, the old school way where, I would go outside and have two easels set up, painting different plein air paintings, and I was timed in the snow, in the rain. I had to be able to paint in any circumstance, and I would do 5-minute paintings to hour paintings, and yeah, like all of that training. But it definitely, I think that then at that point I was able to do these plein air paintings in my sleep, but it wasn't, I think it reached a point where it wasn't satisfying for me.
Yeah, it seems to be the case for a lot of things. And obviously, like anything, you just had to, it was a time for you to go down a different path with your work. One thing you touched on briefly before is about the healing quality of you actually doing the work. I'd imagine now when you're doing it, to do it from a place of kind of surrender and allowing the work to come through must feel much more healing quality for you, as well as the people that are viewing it, compared to, say, some of the things where you said you had to ice pack your hand, because the energy of that would have been maybe a lot of tension in that, where maybe with what you're doing now, that there's lack of tension. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on how it helps you with maybe overcoming some challenges or trauma in your life or work or anything. It'd be good to hear that.
Yeah, I think, well, when you just said right now the word trauma, I think we all suffer on some degree, some much more than others, and we've all had trauma to some degree as well. So I think, being human, we're going to experience all these feelings of shame, sadness, joy, love, fear, and what do we do with that, and where is that stored, and how can we transmute these emotions? And I found that when I started working intuitively and more and abstract, a lot of the healing came within, and I think every day we spend a lot of time going outwards, right? Like we wake up, we reach for our phone, we're immediately, and so I don't think there's a lot of time during the day, unless one meditates or one journals, or that we spend time with our emotions and going within. So I think the painting for me allowed me that time and that sacred space so that I can go within. And I think, and when I first took that leap, it was like opening floodgates, because you do that and then everything just comes out. So I decided to try and explore this by leading some workshops at different healing centers and spiritual centers. So I went to the San Francisco Spiritual Center, and I worked with a group of, they're called angel workers. And I don't know if we have this in New York, but, or anywhere else, but they basically, someone partners up with an angel worker partners up with someone who's going through the dying process, and just is there to be with them, guide them, and it was just, I mean, I thought, wow, like what a group of people that would just volunteer to do something like that. And so I started, looking up a lot of different spiritual teachers and gurus who have written books and spent their lifetime on this. And I kind of put together a workshop along with what I call transformational art, which for me is about painting your fears and your past traumas and pain. And it doesn't have to be so deep either. It could just be like, okay, I had a pretty crappy day today and I want to just sit for five minutes and just explore and just paint. And, so it doesn't have to be so deep either. But what was interesting was with this group of people, and then I had also some surgeons and doctors in there, but the idea again was not to make something pretty or beautiful. It was just to be authentic and to get in touch with what those fears are, which in that situation, it was the fear of death, which is something we all face in all humanity, no matter what race, religion, nationality, and connects all of us. And to pour that out. And it was amazing because I had these 6-year-old men crying, tears, working on this. But what was beautiful was in the end, everyone created something that was so beautiful. And I think they were surprised why it would be beautiful when it was such a deep fear. And and we all talk about death as and they would, you would think you'd paint something very dark and horrific, but it actually was really beautiful. And it was really moving. And so taking that and then working here at the Harlem Hospital in New York City with children, I'm on the pediatrics floor, and I work with them, and we paint. I just say to get in touch with our emotions and how we're feeling. Usually it's in the moment because children are more present. So we go into that. And so I call that transformational art. And I think as adults, we have buried a lot of our past traumas and emotions. And like I said before, we don't really spend the time daily to go within. So they're kind of all stored in there. So bringing it out to the surface and letting it come allows us to, I think, transform those emotions into, love and joy and peace. And yeah.
That sounds amazing, the work you're doing. And I love the fact that it's not just, with elder people, it's, it's with children, because as you say, everyone walking on this planet is dealing with some level of trauma, whether it's childhood, ancestral work, some people would say past life work, and I look at this year, for instance, there's been some major traumas been getting released through what we've been going on. But to see the way you're applying it, because and when you talked about it, it reminded me of Ram Dass, that because he would spend a lot of time with people who were dying. And I think there's a real, particularly in the West, there's a real issue with people burying their head in the sand when it comes to death. It's almost like they're that scared of death. They almost don't live the life as to the best of their ability, because they're scared of the fear of stuff. But without realizing it's coming to us all one day anyway, and it kind of feels like, well, let's make the most of it while we're here, and push
and face it forward. And the more we could face it and confront that, because there's studies and it's proven. I mean, most of the things we do every day, whether it's conscious or subconscious, is to avoid that day that is going to come. So I think if we can face these fears, whether it's of death or of other things happening in our lives, then we could, to what you're saying, live more fully.
And I know from my own experiences, when I've done some of the inner work and I push through some blockages of stuff, it's tough to go through because you don't want to face it ideally. But when you do and you face it, wow, you feel so good after it. Like you feel, that phrase of you got a weight on your shoulders, like that, to feel that weight lifted, you feel lighter, you feel more energized, you feel more creative. So yeah, it's definitely a time for it. It's great to see how, like, you have a term on your website called "Art is a Force for Healing," and I
Mhm.
totally agree with that. I'm a designer as such, but I don't do enough kind of drawing and painting. I used to do a lot when I was
Mhm.
younger, but then I've gone on a
Mhm.
few kind of retreats, and one of the
Mhm.
days on the retreats would be for us to start painting and drawing, and I think I had some blockages around that, thinking, oh, am I going to be any good anymore? And I think when all kids draw and paint, they're not thinking, am I
Right.
any good at this? They're just doing it. But I think adults, and whether this is through the way we've been conditioned, most likely that, everything has to be perfect. And if I'm not good at something, I'm not going to do it. So I think what you're talking about and the stuff you would have been doing with 60-year-olds, some of them, may have never painted before, or if they did, it was
Right.
when they were kids. So it's kind
Right.
of getting over ourselves and just
Yes.
and just having being more playful.
Yes, no, absolutely. I think it's so funny because like all of these teachings you mentioned Ram Dass too, it's like a lot of these, spiritual teachers and it's like to go back to how we were as children and to think of how it was when we were children, it's like we're just trying to unlearn everything. And because it's amazing when I'm in the hospital room sometimes with these kids, and they could be sitting there with their leg all to up in the air, they can't move it, can't move their arm, or they can't breathe because they have asthma and like all this stuff. And it doesn't even, I mean, they're not talking, they never talk about their pain, they're not talking about their situation, they're just like, I want to watch this show, or I want to do this, or they're drawing and they're like, all right, I'm bored, I want to play now. They're not, it's just amazing. And I think I learned so much being around them and being around their energy. And I remember this one boy, maybe 5, and he was painting. And I mean, I get a lot of really talented kids, but he was talented, but he was also, I felt like, wow, he must have been a painter in his past life or something, because he was just so comfortable working. And then he would spend a minute and a half on a little, when we work in watercolors, so everything's, it dries quickly. And he just would do one painting and then move to the next painting, to the next painting. I mean, he must have done like 20 paintings in an hour, or less. I don't even remember, but it was like the way he would just finish a painting, move on to the next, and be so confident that he was done, which is something that I think a lot of artists, we contemplate all the time on when are we done? Are we not done? And we spend like hours just thinking if we're done or not. And he's just like, yeah, I'm done. Next paper, and, fills it up, and is just so sure of his marks. And I mean, I really commended him, so, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I always think, like, I've just become a father for the first time, and
Oh, congrats.
thank you. It's like the best time and also the most challenging time in my life.
Mm-hmm.
But I always think like I I think I'm gonna learn more from her than she can learn from
Mm-hmm.
me. And
I
and
do.
rather than them growing up to become adults, it's about us looking at kids and remembering, what did we used to love to do, and
Mm-hmm.
have we gone off course in our life?
Mm-hmm.
What job are we doing that we don't enjoy? What career path have we gone down because we got told that we needed to get a job to pay the bills and do all these things, and then we end up going. So I think it's about remembering what it felt like to be a kid, as you said, and
Yeah.
us learning more from them. And what I love it when we've got our daughter now, but I would go around to my nieces and nephews, and when we would all be there, I would spend more time with the kids. Like, I would
Mm-hmm.
be playing Lego with them. I would be running around the back garden with them, and doing all sorts of stuff. 'Cause I find I have more fun with them than just start being stood there chatting to adults.
I understand that. Yeah. Yeah, I understand that.
So yeah, it's something I'm taking on board, and with our daughter growing up, and I'm just looking forward to playing with her a lot. But so
Mm-hmm.
one thing I'm interested in hearing about, because you do a lot of work with tarot cards as well and reading, so I'd
Mm-hmm.
like to hear how
Mm-hmm.
that ties in with your art and some of the sort of the lessons that you kind of get from that, because I've got a few sets. I've got a few that I use, and it's amazing how if you're just thinking about it from the rational mind, you're thinking, oh, how can this, how can any of this help? But when you sort of just allow stuff and allow the magic to unfold, because the great thing about a pack of cards, you haven't got a clue which one you're turning over. And when I do it, I just trust this is the one for me today. This is the exact message. So I'd just like to hear your process with it, how it ties in with your art.
So I was introduced to tarot about 6 years ago. I have a lot of reader friends, intuitive readers, and all sorts of energy healers. And I think I was, I think it was about 6 years ago where I wanted to learn tarot myself. And so, of course, I started with the Rider deck, and I started with the Mother Peace cards. It's the ones that my shaman has been using for 40 plus years. So I started with those cards that are round. And then from there, then I learned about the Rider deck. And then I think, and like you said, I would pull cards for myself here and there and find those days where I get the same damn card like 5 times, and you're like, how can I get the same card 5 times in one day? It's like, that must be telling. And it's like, why do I keep pulling it? One should be enough, but it's interesting. But I after learning about it and I started practicing, and my friends would then start asking me, can you do, I have some questions, and I'd start, doing little readings for them. Then once I started working with the Rider, I think I felt like the images were a bit outdated, and I felt like they needed a little update and to contemporary times and today's world. And so I thought to myself, well, I think it started with I'm trying to remember which was the first major arcana card that I translated. It was might have been the World, but anyway, I started with one, and I wanted to be authentic to the card. So I only painted that card when I felt like I was experiencing it. So the whole series took a year to create. So I took all the major arcanas and I ended up, translating them into my own versions onto canvas. And they were all like 5 feet to 10 feet paintings. So they're quite large. And again, I would only paint them if I felt like I was experiencing that card. And then in the end, I had a solo exhibit on these major arcana cards, and it was amazing to have them all in one room. I ended up having a tarot reader come, and I did a little talk on the cards before, but it was amazing also to see how some of it wasn't my style. Like, it was interesting, like if you saw the painting, you wouldn't have thought it was me that painted it, but I think I was just channeling, like I was saying, the energy of the card. So it wasn't so much about me and my style. It was like the energy of what the card means. And like it was so much more than just myself and my style. It was I'm not thinking of the right word right now, but it was so much bigger than me. So but it was really interesting to paint them. And then I found that after I painted it, I was like, well, I think I would have done it differently. And I think if I did them more than once, I would have had completely different images, which is also interesting, because it's like it just shows you there's not like one way or one translation. That, I could have probably done 1,000 different paintings on each image. So so I still have a few of these. I think it's hard to sell them because they're just it takes me back to my own personal experience during when I painted that card. And I think the energy really is there because I have people connect with these cards, and then they pull the card and they get the same card, I had a man who came to my studio, and he was looking at my works, and I didn't tell him which one were part of the Arcana series and which one wasn't. And he gravitated towards the Hermit. And he kept going back to the Hermit, and he was like, I love this painting. I don't know what it is, but I connect with it. And then we started talking about tarot, and I said, why don't you pull a card? And he pulled the Hermit, and he ended up buying the painting. But it was like, you can't make it up, you just can't.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's nice to hear a bit more of a backstory about that process for you, because that must be one of the beautiful things of you being an artist, the way you can apply your skills to something that you're really interested in, and moving that. And obviously one thing that's running through, I think it's like anything, life is energy, isn't it? And your work beyond the art, I understand that you do you're a sound meditation instructor as well. So it's all intertwined, isn't it? And
It's all
Reiki master,
intertwined.
as well.
Yeah, and actually the word just came to me now, that it was cosmic consciousness. So I think what I was tapping into when I was saying it was so much bigger than myself, it was the cosmic consciousness. I believe that it was what I was tapping into when I was creating, because a lot of it was really not my style. So I think I must have been channeling something more, just out of myself.
And then we talk about the channeling then, because we spoke about it briefly before. We've both seen the exhibition, the Hilma af Klint exhibition, the Swedish artist that she was around in the early 20th century, and some of her work is amazing. I'll put a link to it in the show notes so people can check it out. I almost very serendipitous, like just we were in Sweden, we were in Stockholm, we just went to the gallery, didn't realize that exhibition had just started that day, walking around and looking at work and just totally blown away. And she, I understand that she was part of maybe Rudolf Steiner, or there was some kind of connection there. And there was her and three other female artists.
Other female artists, exactly. And they were all there. And what's interesting is you didn't hear about them, because at the time it was about male artists. So a lot of these women artists went under the carpet. You just didn't hear about them. But it's amazing that this has been around for centuries. And, she would also paint her dreams, I know. And what's so interesting is, similar to you, I was taken to the exhibit by a friend as well. She said, oh, Michelle, I think you have to come with me. I think you're going to like this exhibit. And so I didn't even know about it. And I always say the art finds you. So I think I was meant to see that exhibition. And the funny thing about it was that I walked around and I just looked at her titles, and I have, I have the same titles in my works. I mean, I went around and I was like, oh, I've named that, 2 years ago, I painted a painting with that title. And just, it was really interesting, because I don't think that anything we're doing is really new. I think the human experience is the human experience, whether it's now or from the 1700s, or whatever. So I think we have a little bit different surrounding. And of course, there are some new diseases now out there, and, other, material things. But the actual, I think that the pain and the suffering and what we experience being human, the duality between the light and the dark, has been here from, life began. So I think I can take my teachings and my experiences and translate them to my own footprint, but it's nothing that's really new.
Yeah. No. Well, your work is beautiful, so I'll be sure to include links to that as well.
Thank you.
When I share the interview. We touched on the sound meditation. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I spent some time at the Chopra Center a couple of years ago. And I got my certification in primordial sound meditation. I also learned a bit about Ayurveda, and what else? I took so many courses there, but it was, for me, the meditation is definitely crucial to myself and my and then my creativity. But there's all types of meditation out there. This is, I don't know how deep you want me to go into the actual primordial sound, but it basically reflects back to the sound, the earth, the universe, the earth had when you came into manifest. So depending on the time of birth, the location, and where the sun and the moon, all of that was, there's this particular sound that is different for each of us, and that meditation is particular to that specific sound. So I just thought it was interesting. So I wanted to learn about it, but I try to incorporate everything. Same with Reiki. I do Reiki my art, and myself and others. So that's all part of me and my work. And I think getting in touch with that, with the, whatever you want to call it, the chi, the prana, life force within us, and create, and I, use that as my fuel to work. And so I just try to, always make sure, make sure sounds like, but I try to just connect and, yeah, and translate and work from there, really.
So with the sound meditation, if someone was listening to this and they want to find out what the one is specific to them, how would they go about
that? I'm sorry, the sound.
So the sound meditation. So if someone who's listening to this is interested in finding out what the specific, unique one would have been from their time of birth, how do they go about finding out what that is? Do they need to work with a practitioner?
Yes.
Or
Yes, I believe so. I don't think I'm not sure if it's like those astrology charts where you can just type in your day of birth and it pops out. I think you do have to speak to a practitioner, and I'm happy you could, feel free to reach out to me. For all of you out there that would like more information, you can reach out to me.
No, it's interesting because I'm just thinking about my daughter born. I would love to know.
Oh, right. Yes.
What would be her unique kind of sound, and then of course myself as well. It's interesting. Anything like that, I'm always interested in exploring it, because I think there's so much to. Yeah, once you start to scratch under the surface of stuff, you start to realize how amazing life truly is.
Yeah.
And you're just like blown away by some of the things that come through and the information. Like you're saying, what I can relate to as well with what you're saying about the way you work. Mm-hmm. When you let go and you allow something to come through, you're so amazed with what you've created. Like I remember going back to art college, and I had this one day where I created. It always pops in my head. I didn't know what I was going to do at the beginning of the day. The tutor just said to me, "Here you go. Here's an easel. Here's a thing. You're going to work with." It was like tissue paper art, and I just had, and it was amazing what I did in a day, and I couldn't believe that I'd done it. And I think often we can really surprise ourselves with when we do something new, and we don't think it has to turn out a particular way. And I think that's kind of a bit of a theme that's come through what you're doing and what you're doing. And it's just allowing the magic to come through.
Absolutely.
So I'm interested. What I like to hear about, because I talk to some people who, in different, in business and art, and who work in all sorts of different organizations. Do you have a kind of set way of working? Do you have a set routine to get you in the right mindset? Do you have a morning routine that you follow? Or are you quite just fluid and just go with the flow?
So in terms of the painting, there isn't a routine really. I think I find myself as like the true artist where I end up cramming before a show, or sometimes in my studio late, or sometimes I don't create for a week or so. It's like I don't have a routine in terms of my creative part, but I do, have my routines of, the first thing I like to do is meditate in bed. So I like to get in touch with that space and be in that space, and then have several breaths throughout the day, and then before I create as well, I have a whole, I burn, I have these Japanese incense that I like to have burning while I'm painting. And sometimes I have like Palo Santo going and other things. And then when I finish, I have a little ceremony as well when I'm done working. And then before my paintings leave my studio, so if they're sold or going on to shows, I always cleanse and sage and do these things, the work. Yeah, I believe it's these paintings hold energy, and I always want, my intention is that it brings light and love into people's homes, and I think it's so important what we have surrounding us, especially in our homes where we spend so much time. And so having these pieces on the walls, I want my clients to not only like them but love them and feel good with them. And so I think, I trust that also the clients that are drawn to my work are that we do have this connection. And I always say I can put all my clients into a room and I think they'd become best friends, because there is this like similar thread with everyone. And so, yeah, it's interesting how that all ties together.
Yeah, for sure. Well, one thing I like to ask all my guests is a kind of a question that I kind of, as I come to the end of it, is so obviously you're doing good in the world, particularly what you've been doing obviously with your art, but I really love the way you've been helping children in hospitals and older people and stuff, getting in tune with the traumatic times of life to help to release that. But what would you say to someone who's listening to this that wants to go out and do their own bit of good in the world?
Oh, it's a pretty broad question, but I think if we can start with ourselves, and I believe that we're all here to transform our emotions, and that's why I say transformational art, because I think the more we can transform our fear, sadness, shame, anger, those emotions back to love and peace, I think we're bringing more light into the world. So if that means doing the work of when we're angry and in those states to breathe and to whether it's to write down what it is, whatever it is that helps us transmute those feelings, I think is what we can bring. Because if we're in that space of light and joy, then you illuminate that, and the person you're with and who you're, the strangers you encounter, will connect with that and will feel that. So the more light I think that we could all bring in together, and I don't think we necessarily have to do something, which is, it's great if we can help, an elderly or actually, donate to charity. I mean, those are all great things and wonderful things, but I think that is the hard work, is to transform those feelings so that we can all evolve and evolve for the better, hopefully, and then we can move into that direction of bringing more light into the world.
That sounds like a great response. Yeah, I'm completely on board with all of that, and support that. One of the things, the reason I did set this podcast up is because I think there's so much good happening in the world. But if you turn on the news, you put on the TV, you listen to the radio, then you
I don't watch the news.
No, me neither. But if you were to, you just get bombarded with negativity, and
Yeah.
same with social media as well. I think a lot of people who you can see people's unresolved trauma just coming out in all the stuff that they're saying, and instead of actually getting angry and triggered by stuff, it's almost you're asking yourself, well, why am I feeling the way I am about it?
Absolutely.
Rather than get angry and negative and attack stuff. That just came to me anyway. I know it sort of ties it.
I actually I spent a year putting together a book that I created called Awakening, and I spent, you know, in my studio when I'm working, I have these thoughts that come to me, and so I just jot them down. And so at the about I don't know, I think I have about 200 paintings in the book. So I kind of did a compilation of books with these quotes that I've come to, and created this book. So for all of you out there that want a little bit more insight into the thoughts that's happening in my studio and my work, feel free to go on my website, michellesakhai.com.
Yeah, I'll be sure to include links to that. Well, it's been really nice chatting with you today,
Thank you.
Michelle. I think before we go, for the ones that will be watching this, can you just show the little New York skyline again to
Yes.
to
Yes.
people?
Yeah, so here is New York City. I'm right here on the Upper East Side, so you can see this is looking east. Oh.
Awesome. That's cool. Really cool.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really wonderful chatting with you.
No,
and all of you listening out there.
Yeah, it's been great.